Hi folks, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am Eastern Forest. I'm coming to you from more self-quarantine, currently in Boise, Idaho, but planning on making, hopefully, God willing, the drive down to southern Utah to my land down there. Because, originally I was always going to go down there around the beginning of April. I was spending the winter up here, and it turns out this would be a good time to probably go down where there's only 200 people in a town, as opposed to, even though Boise's not that big. Things have been, we've been quarantining everywhere, but it's been, the consciousness is raising everywhere about what's happening, and I think we're unfortunately going to be going through some peaking situations in the next few weeks, but more about that in a second. In a little more of a lighter note, I'm very happy to be having Shane Mauss on the podcast this week. Shane's an amazing comedian and really interesting human being because he's one of these guys who just pursues what he's interested in. And for years he was doing merging psychedelics and stand-up. He's got these head talks but he's also doing the Stand-Up Science, which is another show where it's merging stand-up with science talks, and it's just awesome. And he's got an amazing podcast himself, and so I saw some crossover with our interests, and it was really cool that he could come on board. When we recorded this podcast together, it was right at the beginning of when things were really getting locked down. Like, it was that first weekend when things were getting like, wow, what's happening? And everything was getting canceled, particularly for us performing people like Shane and myself. So he admits, you'll see it midway through the podcast, that it's like I caught him. He was gracious enough to still do this conversation, even when like there's a lot of chaos going around and everything's getting canceled. And so he felt pretty amped up, and he speaks to that. And what I also like about this conversation is that he's got his own point of view, from a science point of view that he's putting forth about like the psychedelic experience and his experience with that. And he actually comes to a really interesting conclusion at the very end of the podcast. So if you're able to stick with it, you'll see him kind of bring it all around into this wonderful space of not knowing and possibility. And so just wanted to put that out there. The conversation is a journey in itself, but he was very gracious with his time. It was super cool to meet him. I've heard him on Duncan Trussell's Family Hour podcast, and it just felt like someone that I would get along with, and I just wanted to meet, so I'm happy we could. Thank you so much for the folks who've been giving the podcast a review. That really makes a big difference. You can do it right now if you're on Apple Podcasts. While I'm talking, go back to wherever the main show page is on your Apple Podcast thing and scroll all the way to the bottom. Give it 5 stars, write a little review. It's really sweet if you do. Thanks for the ones that recently came in. Looks like, is it Gyan Mudra? You said, great sound quality, well-produced beginning to end, very thoughtfully done. I really appreciate the show. Well, that's kind. You're singing in my ears about the sound quality. I do put a lot of effort into that. Do whatever I can to make it sound good for you guys, so appreciate that. And then Atma Joe, looks like you liked the last one with Raghu Marcus. I loved your talk with Raghu. He's one of the most knowledgeable people on anything Ram Dass, and his stories from very beginning until today are priceless. Yeah, they are. Anytime I meet someone who's especially met Maharaji, it's like all I want to know is like, I feel like I'm 1 degree away. I'm like, tell me everything. So that was really, really great last week's episode. But this is episode 100 this week, so it's a big milestone for myself. I started a podcast many, many, many years ago. I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And I got up to episode 64, and it was just music improvisations. I called it Music Meditations. Sound Healing Bites. Oh my God. It was called Sound Healing Bites with East Forest. It's not up anymore, so no need to try to find it. I took it down eventually, and I kept 10 of them, which became the album Music Meditations that is out there on my website and stuff. But all 64 of them, I think I took them down because eventually I was not that proud of all the music and so forth. I don't know. I had a moment where I was like, I don't want this up anymore. But when I came back to do a new podcast, to do this one, it took years to kind of get it to happen for me because I knew it was a bit of a commitment. And I don't like to quit things. I like to do things and finish things. And not that there's a finish to this, but getting past 64 episodes and now making it up to 100 feels really good. And I really, really enjoy getting the chance to talk to people and to offer you like meditations and music and really whatever is inspiring. So I'm just happy we've hit this milestone. We're now in the triple digits. I hope to keep going with it. It feels anything I can do now by myself or alone with music in East Forest feels great because that's what we have to do right now. So this feels like a really valuable way for us to be in connection and a kind of conversation where I can share some thoughts and you guys send them back in these, with your reviews online, or you send me an email, info@eastforest.org, and all the support you've given financially. So I'm psyched. And I'm psyched Shane Mauss is Mr. 100. Lastly, I just want to also say thanks to everyone who tuned in to the Music for Mushrooms live East Forest ceremony that I did on the live YouTube stream on March 28th. And that was the second one because the weekend before, on March 21st, I did the East Forest ceremony live stream concert. And they're both kind of similar in tone and vein and energy. But what was also cool is I did the East Forest Council. I know it's lots of East Foresty things here. But the council was an experiment about what if we opened up a Zoom gathering for a smaller group of people and we could gather the day before. So we chatted on Friday, and then we also gathered right after the live stream on Saturday night. It's like 11:30 at night Eastern or something. And oh my God, it was so amazing and weird and cool that it's like all these people, I didn't know anybody, no one knew everybody. And there we all are on screen, essentially strangers, all united in that in this particular instance, there was some kind of interest or common thread with medicine plant work, and then doing a ceremony together in our various places all around the world by ourselves, essentially individually, and then coming together to process and share with such vulnerability and beauty and connection. It's freaking cool. There's a sadness to it because we're doing it because of coronavirus, but it's again another one of these like silver linings that comes out of the experience where I don't think I would have been doing these things otherwise, like doing live stream ceremonies where, there are several thousand people joining in from around the world and really, really like dropping into that heart space. Besides the fact that we're like doing it at the same time, that's really cool. It's just like, we're opening it up in ways at a scale that before, I fly somewhere and we set up and people have to come and they do the thing, which is amazing. And I wouldn't actually even compare the two as far as being equal experiences. But this was just like a new opportunity, a new opening that has emerged. And I feel like there's many of these coming forth out of this experience, this initiation that we're going through as a people. And something that I spoke about, and I might have said this on the last podcast, but we were talking on the council together on the Zoom, that I really feel like we're in some kind of birth canal, and we don't know what's on the other side of it. And in this experience, it's very dark and bloody and violent, just like when a baby is coming through the experience of going through that, and it doesn't know what's going to happen. And it's a tough experience. And we can't know what's coming in the future, but we are seeing like divergent futures opening in front of us, and some of them involve fear and isolation and control, and some of them involve newness and connection and solidarity, and things that we've maybe dreamed about happening for a long time. We actually are starting to see some of these things happen. I mean, forms of universal basic income, not in its fully fledged form, but parts of that are being talked about. And what do we do about the social holes that are being exposed, about people who are hotel maids or Uber drivers or the homeless or people in prisons, or all these situations where the virus has no discrimination in how it affects the people who have these inherent issues that were issues before, but now there's being talked about in ways that many of us want to find solutions. We want to do something that can help and there's beauty in that. In human beings, showing forth what we've already known, that like We want to do better. We want to help. And in some ways, there's some of that already emerging, even from voices and places and corporations at times, that you wouldn't expect it. Now, that's not the whole story. Of course, we have the other story going on as well, where there's some instances of tightening of control and fear about, power grabs and things like this. And these are stories that are emerging concurrently, and we are at a bit of a crossroads with this. But I encourage you to, just as we were talking about in the live stream online East Forest ceremony type experience, it's a time where it's important for us to tap into that intuitive space, that heart space, and trust that you can reach forth and help. And it's not going to put you in a place of vulnerability that you shouldn't do it. Perhaps it's actually a place of strength, and perhaps it's something that's wanting to emerge, and you just need to sort of give a little kindling to that small fire. You need to, with a little love and a little trust and a little faith. None of us know, how all this is panning out, whether how long it's going to be or what the future is after that. We will be changed. We are being changed by this. We can't know what all that change is, but there is going to be a grieving process. I know we're already in it, of saying, missing what was, in a sense. But I think we can all agree that there were some things in our old story that we don't want anymore, and that were perhaps a bit broken, and we want to change them. And it's okay to grieve their death. And it's okay to be in a process with it where we don't know how it's all changing into what and what it's emerging into. And sitting in that space of not knowing is uncomfortable, and it's also beautiful. It's a space of infinite possibilities. So it's not to say, I'm not trying to sound sanguine and that I don't have any issues myself with this. I absolutely do. I'm trying to speak to them. But we have to keep walking our walk, keep putting one foot in front of the other, and doing our best. It's a wild, wild time, friends, and I'm glad we're here together. So we're going to dive into this conversation for now. Really nice musical treat at the end for you as well. A brand new track from the ceremony that I just get a quick bounce of. Let's do this. This is my friend, Shane Mauss. So one thing that's really cool that I noticed you're up to is you have this intersection between science and psychedelics, and it's like interests of yours, right? And I've noticed you've been leaning a bit more in the science direction as far as the shows you've been producing. For the future, and
I kind of fancy myself, if anything, more of a science communicator than a psychedelic guy, but it's almost two separate things for me. So basically what happened was I was a regular comedian for I've been a comedian for 16 years. And when I started, I did regular, late night and Comedy Central stuff and just regular old stand up. I was a little bit of an absurdist and that sort of thing. And then later on in my career, I started wanting, got older, wanted to talk about things with a bit more substance. I always had an interest in science. It became an obsession in my 30s. And I started a podcast called Here We Are, where I interview a different scientist each week. And at the same time, I was trying to put put solo shows together with just trying to find a way of combining science and stand up. So I did this special called Mating Season, and I was on Netflix for a while. It was kind of my first whack at trying to do science stuff. It was all right. And then I kind of figured it out a little bit more in my next album. I did this album, My Big Break, about the evolution of pain and positive and negative emotions and that sort of thing. And then I happened to be on some podcasts talking about psychedelics, and I kind of happened to get I was in the closet about my psychedelic use at the time. But
when is this? What's the timeline on the psychedelic revolution we're in?
This is 2014 or 15, and I always had kind of hours of psychedelic material together, and I would do like a couple minutes here and there in a comedy club, and didn't really know how to transition into doing it more full time. But I happened to have, it was the only good thing my agent ever did was had the idea of trying out this psychedelic show in like an indie venue and trying to see if I could market it and find a crowd. At the time, I've never been to Burning Man. I wasn't really familiar with any psychedelic research. I don't go to live music. I'm a bit of a hermit, and most of my psychedelic experience
you
was
dropped
just
mushrooms a few times and was really, you had some personal insights though. I mean, it was valuable to you personally, it sounds like.
Oh, I did a lot of psychedelics, but I just did them by myself, and I didn't know there was like a whole community out there.
Okay.
And especially once I started doing DMT, that was
the rabbit hole.
Yeah, that got me more and more interested. And then I had my science podcast at the time, and so it started inspiring a lot of questions. But yeah, so anyhow, I put together this solo show about psychedelics, and that's when I got known as like this psychedelic comedian or something. It's never anything that I wished for or wanted or angled for, but I love doing it. I like psychedelics for me were just a way of getting people into talking about perception and consciousness that might otherwise not really be that interested in science talk. So
right, and that's the thing I want to ask you about, because I know you did a documentary. Is it out already?
Yeah,
okay.
It came out last year. Yeah,
and
it's on Amazon
I haven't seen
Prime.
It, but I'm looking forward to seeing it.
It's called
I just learned about it. Yeah, and in this film, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's sort of like it was about you, and it has to do with psychedelics to some degree. But then through making it, you experienced a psychotic break of sorts, and this is part of the movie. And I feel like something about that break also was maybe what fueled this shift from doing like the psychedelic shows to more of the science shows, and your own shift into like more science. Was it that timeline?
No, like I was trying to say, I was doing science shows already, and science was like my main thing. I have my science podcast. The psychedelic thing was just like meant to be this little one-off little project. Yeah, that blew up more than I would have anticipated. And then because I was doing that at the time, these documentary people got a hold of me. It just so happened that I was going to a psychedelic conference. If I would have been going to like a biology conference or something, then the documentary would have been about biology. But yeah, so we interviewed all these researchers and then figured out how to make a documentary from there. And then I went back to my science shows, like I do stand-up science. Well, the thing is like, that's if you do like a show about psychedelics, you're all of a sudden the psychedelic guy.
It's true.
You think that science is like this fun little new project that I started from my psychedelic. Like everyone has some perception like that. Like most people they've like now heard me like do a bit about DMT on Comedy Central or something, and I'm happy to embrace it, but I love performing for psychedelic audiences and stuff. But if you look at my podcast, I've been doing it for 5.5 years. I have about 300 episodes. Maybe about 10 of them are with psychedelic researchers. So it's actually a pretty small. And I only did those to kind of promote my psychedelic tour. So it's a pretty small interest of mine actually, but it's.
Don't you think that they're both different forms of research and inquiry into like science? It's just another way of doing it.
Absolutely, you know? Absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. And many of the, although I don't have that many psychedelic researchers on my show, many of the questions that I have for like neuroscientists and memory researchers and that sort of thing come from my own personal psychedelic experiences. I just don't say that. So I don't research psychedelics myself in terms of I don't read what everyone else is saying is going on with psychedelics. I hear enough of it just because I'm in those worlds, but I feel like it messes with my perception quite a bit and influences my own experiences. I prefer to have a psychedelic experience and then go and talk with scientists outside the field of psychedelic research about what maybe the brain is doing.
Do you think it makes a better scientist if they've done psychedelics? I've always asked therapists, I'm like, hey, have you ever gotten into these spaces? Because I feel like it's part of consciousness and living that if you haven't been there, it's like kind of hard to relate on some levels. I mean,
yeah. I mean, especially with so I know MAPS is pushing one of the things that they're having an issue with the FDA, which is otherwise being exceptionally good to the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, which I'm sure you've talked about many times. So they have breakthrough status through the FDA, meaning the FDA kind of has to speed along their process because the results so far have been so good that it's potentially unethical to keep it away from people that use it. Now they have this expanded access. They're getting all of this stuff that's like incredibly difficult to do unless you're seeing the best of the best results. But the one thing that they are having trouble with is getting the FDA to approve the therapists themselves dosing and using MDMA. And I mean, it's a totally different space in different world. And like, I mean, do you want to be taught? Do you want to go to driver's ed and be taught by someone that's just like read about how driving works, and like that's who's in the passenger side and teaching you how to drive and helping be your guide? I mean, maybe that's not the best metaphor in the world. Maybe that's a little biased and unfair, but I mean, it's just, first off, when you're tripping, it's hard being with people that have tripping experience but aren't tripping at that moment, let alone someone that's never tripped, never been in that space. I don't think that would
work for psychedelic therapy.
I think
you have to at least have done it before, I think
it's potentially harmful. I mean, that might be an extreme take, but at the least, I don't see how you could possibly be as good of a psychedelic assisted therapist with having zero experience. I just don't see how that's possible. But and then in terms of, is it good for science? I mean, absolutely.
Good for mind, good for it to be like you're thinking outside the box. Certainly many scientific revelations have come from LSD and other, as it's been said.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't say enough good. And I don't think that I would have, I started doing psychedelics when I was 16 years old. I don't think I'd have my interest in psychedelics science and neuroscience and how the brain works. I can't imagine, a parallel universe where I exist having not done psychedelics and that person is still as deeply interested in science as I am. And then also, the scientists, the academics that I talk to, one, I'm sure they're pretty guarded about any psychedelic use that they do have because there's still a taboo around it that exists. But I have had people tell me off of the record that, like, I've talked with people like neuroscientists and psychologists that are like, I was going to be like a marketing person or an accountant or something like that. And then I smoked DMT in college and needed to know how the brain works. I mean, I think they go really, really well hand in hand. And sorry to like push back if you feel like I was pushing back. I just, for clarity,
I like the pushback. No, it's good.
I wanted no, just in terms of like, I just want people to know like psychedelic comedy is like not what I do and who I am.
Yes,
it just happened to be this one little aspect. And actually, so I've been touring with the show Stand Up Science. I have two scientists on each show, and then I'll have a second comedian. So it's a show that's half comedy sets and half science talks. And I found the same effect. What happened was, if I did have like a drug researcher, even a cannabis researcher or anything, just once out of like 20 shows, if I had one of the academics that did like some sort of psychedelic thing, I was booking it kind of to represent my podcast. So like 1 out of 20 shows, I would book a psychedelic researcher, or somewhere in that vein. What happened was that subject matter would take over the entire show. No one cared about like the zebra researcher or whatever the other person was researching. And so So not only that, but then I have a lot of people that come out to this show. I have my own fans that come out to the show, and then I have people that just like the idea of science and comedy being mixed together. They see that I have credits. I have a science podcast. I've been on Conan, blah, blah, blah. I have these credits that people love to hear. It's these kind of stamps of validation that people need to know before attending a show or whatever, because no one knows who the fuck any comedian is, which is fine. But anyway, so it's a good place for me to find new listeners and get new fans and know but anytime there was a drug researcher, it would turn into like the drug show basically. And that was what everyone there's a Q&A at the end. That was every one of their questions was about psychedelics.
Yeah, psychedelic audiences, like if you put psychedelic in the title of a conference or something, it sells out. It's a very fanatic audience, which is sort of an underserved energy in a sense, but man, they are really energetic people.
Yeah, and they're enthusiastic, and part of it is because they are underserved. This is like...
It's been in the shadows.
This is like now weed is no longer underserved, and so it's like, now it's kind of like old news. People don't care that much. But psychedelics are really, really underserved, and they've had a much more profound change in many people's lives. But just to finish, so people know like what I'm doing now in terms of psychedelic communication, I had to separate the show. I couldn't have psychedelic researchers on my show anymore, because also like, there'd be like people that would come up that were just interested in science, and then they'd be like, so is your science podcast all just like psychedelics and drug talk? Like, you have one guest talk about psychedelics, and that's just like who you are. And so because of that, and then because there's so much demand for this, and people, and I love material about psychedelics and everything else, I just don't do it that often. So I've created a psychedelic version of my show, Stand Up Science, called Head Talks, that I've started touring with in select markets. And it's not select markets, it's just select. I can only do it for about 2 or 3 weeks at a time, because I'm kind of beholden to the other guests that I have on it, and they live in Peru most of the time. So anyway, all of that is to say is like, you can have one psychedelic episode and you're like the psychedelic person, and it's just
you sleep with one psychedelic speaker and you're gay. Yeah. It's over.
It's just it's crazy. So for me, and the reason why that's important for me to differentiate, because as I do believe in psychedelic advocacy and changing laws and so it's really actually important to me how I represent myself in certain ways, because I would much rather be this legitimate science communicator that goes around talking with, all the top scientists in the country about a variety of fields, and also happens to advocate for psychedelics, rather than being some psychedelic advocate that, I guess he has a science podcast as well. I don't think that helps the movement as much either,
Yes, and you may say there might not be like one propelled the other, the psychedelics into the science, but obviously they're both interests of yours. And I'm curious, given what you went through personally with that break and what you went through, where you kind of were losing a grip on reality, from what I've read at the moment. How do you view like the psychedelic state and your own experiences now that you're like looking at it through the scientific lens? Or what have you learned about that since then?
Well, it was a really, really interesting experience. Basically, what isn't shown in the documentary is how many psychedelics I was actually doing, which was a lot. Off camera, I was kind of trying to stay in the headspace as much as possible to figure out ways of articulating it. And we had a low budget and a short amount of time to make this thing. We were trying to shoot everything in like 3 months. And so normally I would do like a psychedelic experience every 3 months. But because of these circumstances, I was doing psychedelics just like 3 times a week or something. So I wasn't integrating as much as I normally do. I wasn't using, I was going for bigger doses. I wasn't.
Is this mostly mushrooms, psilocybin?
Mostly mushrooms. And then I'm just plugging my computer into a battery here. Or into the power outlet. But yeah, ayahuasca was kind of a tipping point for me. I had done ayahuasca previously, and it was pretty mild compared to the many DMT experiences that I had had. And so I was trying to find a dose that would kind of get me, where people had been talking about. And I was like rather skeptical after the couple experiences that I had. And so I did a very large dose, things just
Things shifted.
It was I mean, it was the most fantastic experience I've ever had in that trip, in that moment. It was just that then that following day, things from the ayahuasca experience were seemingly kind of bleeding into this reality, and things became confusing, and I couldn't tell how much of it was confirmation bias and everything else. It was a really, really interesting experience. I definitely was losing it. It was an interesting experience to know what it's like to kind of go crazy and perceive all these messages and that are very confusing, and it made reality seem like a simulation or a Truman show, all the cliches. But to really experience that, it gave me a lot of insight into what mental health is like, in terms of when it can go bad, what psych wards are like. I got to find out what psych wards are like, and they're horrifying. And and so I have a lot more empathy for people, especially like homeless, schizophrenics and that sort of thing, that are just have some neurochemistry that's a bit off, and making them perceive things in a way that's alienating them away from everybody. And who knows, if a little bit of help, they could turn things around. I was certainly I guess lucky that my experience was temporary. It certainly lasted for longer than I would have liked, but it was interesting to kind of lose my mind, know that I was losing my mind, have a part of me that was sane, that was trying to talk me out of what I was perceiving, and then have it eventually slow down and come back to reality, which I knew was always going to happen, but not everyone else in my life didn't know that and was very scared for me. So did
it feel at all like a rebirth moment afterwards, or like, is there like any spiritual connection for you from like when I would imagine with the ayahuasca and the mushrooms and these DMT, at some points it probably had that spiritual dimension for you, or was this more just like reality was shifting into a different space?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I'm not the most spiritual. Why would I even say it like that? I'm not a spiritual person. Plain and simple. And I have respect for people's spiritual practices and ideas, and I love talking about the subject. But maybe had I not been as resistant to spiritual ideas as I was, I mean, things might have gone smoother for me. Part of it was like I didn't want to believe some of the things that I was perceiving, and so I fought very hard to come up with logical explanations for what was happening, and then those logical explanations eventually became grasping at straws, until I'm eventually coming up with ideas about like, well, maybe there's time travelers fucking with me or something like that. Anything other than like a mystical experience. And so it was interesting. I mean, it was, I remember in that experience and in DMT experiences that I've had, it certainly feels like some sort of spiritual experience, but afterwards it's not my perception of it.
Huh. So in the moment you felt that, but something afterwards you kind of change your mind in a sense? It's like,
yeah, I usually just think it's how the subconscious works, and that we have a kind of a multiverse of perception inside of our minds that we don't normally have access to, and these kind of beings and things that you see in these experiences are just different mental representations of who you are and the different people in your life, and it's a little bit more like a dream is the closest that I would a dream's really underselling it. But if someone had never had a dream before in their entire life and then had their first one as an adult, I mean, it would be about as trippy as it would be trippier than any trip anyone could have too. So, you know, I think we're just not used to gaining access to these worlds, but I think that there's something that, I think right now that world that you see in DMT or ayahuasca, I believe they're in my subconscious mind happening right now, putting together these words, running ideas and simulations about how this conversation is going to go and where I should take things next. And this is just happening at a different time scale than we're used to normally perceiving, and it looks very different in digital and everything else. But so that's kind of my general take on it, that it's like kind of like the movie Inside Out in a way, inside of our heads, and that you're just dropping down and accessing those worlds and in these states. But I mean, I certainly don't blame people for thinking they're seeing gods and spirits and stuff, because it's absolutely what it looks like when you're in that moment.
It does, yeah, and that's kind of sort of a rationalist. I don't mean that pejoratively, but it's like a rationalist viewpoint or a reductionist viewpoint on like how to make sense of like where all that's coming from. Maybe it's just endogenously in our bodies, and that's, I mean, certainly when we're dreaming or when we're sleeping, and we have the capability to make some pretty fantastic worlds, and maybe things like it's looking like DMT is probably produced in our body. For what reason, I don't know, but I think for most people, some of the scenes, you know, some of the things they experience are so intense, or so almost like they describe it as realer than real, or the synchronistic feelings of it, like the meaning of it, or a mystical experience. Maybe that's something they haven't even had before in their life. Yeah, that it creates great meaning. And I know our consciousness and our mind is always looking for meaning in life, right? Trying to make connections. But at the same time, it feels sometimes so like perfunctory and so real and just so. It's hard to make sense of. Yeah,
it's part of the reason why I kind of don't, why I'm skeptical. So these things that seem so perfect, I mean, I actually think that's an indicator that these are actually simpler processes happening in our minds. If you take something like fractals, which are, you know, you can plug in a very simple recursive program and create like a Coach Snowflake or what have you. And this looks very mind-blowing the first time you see it and when it's explained to you. But it's actually much more... I find that the DMT and psychedelic spaces, part of my problem with thinking that there's some other dimension, it's just that they're too symmetrical. They're too perfect. Most of it is like... and I actually think that's simpler in terms of computational power. If you think of like the psychedelic art that's coming out, you know, people are familiar with Alex Gray's stuff or whatever.
Andrew Jones.
I mean, this is stuff that's like that. Basically, we're able to make with some pretty simple computer programs. We're primates that are. And these computers are really relatively new. They're only going to get more advanced. And we're already able to make things like half this shit just looks like a screensaver. You know, you can make a screensaver that 40 years ago would have looked like the craziest psychedelic trip of your life, using just some very simple programs. But what would, if you were say making a simulation, what would really be hard to make is all of the little flaws and everything. Like, it's really easy to make something symmetrical if you're making a video game. What takes more computation is to program in all of the flaws, all the cracks in the sidewalks and the imperfections in buildings and characters.
But wasn't fractal math developed to measure like a question of something like what is the length of a coastline, for instance? When you keep zooming in, there's more and more details. So it's sort of like a way of trying to understand infinite variety in a sense, or chaos. I don't know. Yeah. I'm not a mathematician.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the ways in which fractals are used. But there's also, you know, plants use fractal-like math, like the Fibonacci sequence or something that's like, oh my God, the Fibonacci, so crazy that all these plants have it. But really, it's if you're if you're creating a structure where you want each leaf to absorb as much light as possible, what you want to do is spread out each leaf around like 33 degrees or something like that. So they're spread out in this fashion to absorb enough sunlight. And it's just this very, very simple structure that evolution has stumbled upon that was then favored. And it seems very magical and everything, but it'd actually be stranger if this wasn't the case, that this was happening. And so all these things, like, you know, if you don't, if you've like never read about them or looked into how they work, they absolutely, you know, seem magical. But I actually, you know, in these states, you do DMT and you see fractals or what, I mean, so fractals are potentially a way of kind of, in a roundabout way, fitting the infinite inside of a finite space in a manner of speaking. That's really making it seem a little more grandiose than it is. But that might also be a really nice way to send packets of information on some level of the brain that we haven't discovered yet. And so, yeah, I would say that I'm still, and so when you see this for the first time, it's very jarring. You've never seen anything like it before. And of course you're going to be like, well, I just saw God and that seemed more real than real. But part of the reason why it seems more real than real is that it's like simpler. I mean, TVs these days, the screens are getting so like high resolution. I don't know if we're at like 12K now or whatever, but you look at these screens and you watch like Planet Earth or something like that, and you're like, oh, this looks more real than, it doesn't even look like real life.
Yeah, contrast and stuff. Yeah, I mean,
but it is real life, and the movie itself is actually more fake than real life is. It's just that you normally don't get to see a bug that close up, and so it's jarring to you to see that. Whereas if you're out and about on a hike and you saw like a little ladybug like that or something, you know, you wouldn't think much of it.
Do you think science and mysticism can coexist, or the mystical experience has a place in the scientific mindset or world?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm all for mindfulness. And I mean, I think if that, you know, I would just say it's the subconscious mind. If you replace the word God with subconscious, I mean, it makes perfect sense. That's just like, well, you just need to have faith in the subconscious. The subconscious knows every move that you make, and the subconscious is always looking out for you and knows every sin you've ever done and every dream in your heart. And I think that I think that spirituality has always just been, spirituality and science are both just trying to get into these kind of hidden areas of the brain. I just think that there's, you know, in terms of, if you take something like, are we manifesting our reality? Well, the subconscious is really great at, like, if you really believe something, you know, placebo effects work better than almost any medicine on the planet. You know, if you really, really believe something and have this convincing story and narrative, yeah, you might work harder. It might give you more confidence. It might have impacts on your immune system. It can have all of these incredible things. But, you know, I guess I would say that those kinds of beliefs then need to take ownership over the bad as well. And when there's a flu virus going around shutting down our economy and stuff, is that because, you know, someone was like manifesting the wrong thing? Did someone manifest a flu or a tsunami? I definitely think people need to be a little bit careful. You know, I was raised Catholic, and I've spent a lifetime listening to people, you know, using a lot of like wish thinking and praising God for every good thing, and then letting this concept of God off the hook for all of the suffering in the world. And science says, hey, there's actually ways of monitoring something like a flu, of building better systems, of improving medicine. And so I mean, I think that eventually mindfulness will be just another thing that is going to be explained for in the domain of science. I mean, I think it's great.
In many ways it already is. Yeah. I mean, when that mindset, in the world, sort of a coronavirus world, and moreover, like this kind of massive transition we seem to be going through as a civilization, trying to figure a lot of things out at once.
Yeah.
What do you feel is the path forward to sort of thread that needle? On a personal level, because for some people it's like, well, maybe it's, mindfulness is sort of their key for the lock there. And for some people it might be religious, and some people it might be self-realization or some kind of inner work, or do you believe it's more just about like, look, there's a lot of random things going on and we're just doing our best, and maybe it's about innovation and technology?
Yeah, I mean, I really like that science is peer-reviewed and falsifiable, and you're looking to replicate studies, and because it's always admitting, not every scientist, but basically science itself is always trying to prove itself wrong. It's always trying to figure out how to improve, and it also acknowledges that there's this Bayesian processing of there's no in the future we'll hopefully continue to learn more and more, and we need to update the information that we have. And so as much as I am for believing in yourself and being kind and empathetic to others, I don't think you need to have I think that I do those things just fine with also being a bit of a skeptical dick on a philosophical level. But I mean, the trouble was saying like, but what if we just believe in things? Then that's every religion that's ever sprang up. And I think that I don't think that many people would believe that. Most people disagree with all of the religions that except their own. Yeah. And science doesn't have anything like that going on. And so it's been a hard thing for me to get over being like a angsty atheist that was raised by a bunch of a very hardline, strict religious upbringing that took everything literal. And maybe if that wouldn't have happened to me, I wouldn't have been as bitter about it. But and it's something that science has taught me a lot of empathy for how a lot of these belief systems evolved in the first place, and why humans are constantly looking for meaning and trying to project their own meaning onto things that and over perceiving patterns and everything else. But I think that one thing that I don't like about the psychedelic community is the wish thinking and the sometimes. Here's what I like about the psychedelic community, because I can make fun of like synchronicities or something like that, and the psychedelic community has a sense of humor about themselves and about that. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I make a Jesus joke in Dallas, they don't have the same sense of humor about their beliefs. But I still think that there's a lot of ego involved in the psychedelic community for a bunch of people that are supposed to be ego-less. There's a lot of people that have like an experience and then they believe that it's the ultimate truth. I don't know what the truth is. I have no fucking idea what the psychedelic experience is. It's so confusing. I don't blame people for thinking maybe it's God, because maybe it is God and maybe it is a different dimension. But so many people come up to me afterwards and hear me like talk about my takes on DMT, and they're like, but don't you think of this? And don't you think it could be this guy? I read this and I read that. And I'm like, wow, you know,
I don't know.
I don't know, but like, it sounds like you're the expert. And I'll be like, how many times have you like done DMT that you're like so convinced of this? And they're like, oh, well, I kind of tried it once. I didn't really break through. But anyway, I know for a fact this is what the DMT experience is. And the level the level of confidence that people have in what is, as far as I'm concerned, the most confusing, complex thing on earth. I think that the psychedelic experience, and God, I feel like I'm babbling and ranting so much today. I don't know what got into, I don't know if I'm just in a mood or I'm on edge because I'm having to cancel every fucking show because of this virus or what.
Yeah, man. Look, it is a crazy time, and I feel it too.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like this for people who are listening to this. I don't know when they're listening to it, but we're in like, I kind of think we're in like day 3 or 4 of the total
Shit's hitting the fan.
Seismic shift in our country, and God knows where it will go. But right now is a wild energy that I'm feeling. So
it's a wild energy. And speaking of belief systems, I mean, what happens with these things is then you can have a president who doesn't even have a belief system of his own, but can pretend to have other people's belief systems.
Has his own. He believes in himself.
He believes in himself, and that'll give him enough confidence to get status and everything else. And then just completely dismantling science and the people that could actually stop something like this. And that's what's been going on for a long time. Is religion after religion being like, yes, but science can't say everything, and if it isn't evil and you can't put someone in jail for it, then at least you can be like, well, they don't know everything. And also, like, you know, the term reductionist is thrown, or I heard you use it as it's thrown around like this dirty word or something. Scientists study emergent properties more than anyone else on Earth. As well, and have a better understanding of them too. But you hear that, well, isn't it just oversimplifying anything? Like, no. I have a science podcast. Every time I go in, I'm like, oh, I know. So I've talked about the evolution of mating systems so many times. I'm going to talk about to this evolutionary psychologist about how mating is, and I'm going to get to sound smart because I actually know what I'm talking about for once. And I'll be like, what about this study? And then they're like, actually, there's been some updates, and we figured out that it's a little more nuanced than that and a little more complicated than that. And that's always the path and always the answer with science. But I don't know, man.
What do you think though is like the role of the individual though? Do you think there is one, as far as like, are we supposed to just like join into like the? It seems like in this viewpoint, it's like, look, science is the pinnacle of our being really rational. You know, it's not to put any emotion or ego into it, and we'll just get answers and facts, and we can use those to make really good decisions. Mm-hmm. And so I often think a lot about just sort of my day-to-day life, and I don't know, I like to think about my role in the world I'm in, and like, what role do I have?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, or maybe I don't, but I like to think I do because it gives me more meaning, but I often feel like there's something there.
Yeah.
Besides the fact that I'm the protagonist in my own show,
right,
and everyone else is the protagonist in their show, their epic movie of life.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious for yourself. I'm just kind of hammering at that a little bit because I'm really just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm a very passionate, driven person. I usually am performing in 3 or 4 cities a week, doing live shows, setting them up myself, bringing my own equipment, and spending hours before a show, setting it up, performing a show, greeting people, breaking things down afterwards. Yeah. And I don't know any comic that's touring as much as I am. And
this must be a crazy time then for you in particular.
Oh yeah, it's shut everything down. And then, and then, you know, outside of that, I'm still doing podcasts and interviewing scientists as much as possible. And I'm working on a million other things. And these things mean the world to me. You know, science means the world to me. So I to be like, science strips us of meaning and feelings and emotions. Well, that hasn't been my experience. And also most of the scientists that I talk to are incredibly passionate, driven people, and the difference between emotion and thinking is something that science has kind of also disproved. Most scientists don't really make that differentiation.
Well, what road does science take you to emotionally?
I mean, I think that understanding the complexity of the universe, and speaking of fractals, that everything is fractal-like in every direction, and just like when you're talking about kind of, I guess it'd be in the realm of chaos theory, how you can never exactly measure something, and never exactly measure a coastline. And if you measure it, if you draw a line this way, it's 100 meters long. But then if you make another point, now it's 110 meters long. And now you make another point and it's 115 meters long. And then if you take a yardstick, it gets longer. And then, so if you get an infinitely small measuring tool, then it's infinitely long. Information is also like that. And I think that it's so fucking weird and confusing and endless, and it's often overwhelming. The reason why my podcast is called Here We Are is because I often find myself in trying to learn neuroscience and evolution and physics and how we got here. I find myself so overwhelmed and in awe of the complexity of this universe and this existence and this life and each individual life. We have our own universes, each one of us, inside of our heads, a universe of perception, a multiverse of perception, and just how complicated each and every single one of just one of our perceptions is. I get so overwhelmed by that I almost can't move or can't do anything. And I have to be well, here we are. And then I just move forward and carry on with my day. And so yeah, I mean, I get so much, and also take something like love, where, the psychedelic community, you'll hear a lot of well, it's just love. I saw the answer, and it's all just love, and we just need to love everything. Well, do we love viruses? Probably not. But understanding, if you understand what love is from kind of more of a scientific angle of love is this evolved bonding emotion. There's hormones that drive this sensation. It's a way of forming a social contract with others. Do I like love less than anyone else? I doubt it. Love's the best feeling in the world. And understanding what it is a way of getting more of it. Just like understanding, you can sit and want to be a physically healthy person, but understanding how exercise works, something that I could use some tips on for sure. But understanding kind of why fitness works and the best ways to go about that are going to make you a more physically fit person. I think that you can train your emotions in that same way. You can train yourself to be more disciplined, more patient, more loving, more compassionate, if those are the things that you value. If you want to be more hateful, you could probably train yourself
Absolutely.
to do that too.
And we've shown that you can do that. And I'm just curious, you have a sort of a love affair with science, and I'm curious if it
I'm just on such a I was just talking this is why I'm in such a I just had this conversation last night, because I've been so trying to be as accepting of everyone's belief systems as I can in my adult life, because I feel like I was such an asshole when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. And then just last night, I was trying to think of one halfway decent thing that people could take away from this whole fiasco and apocalyptic scenario. And it's just that hey, we need to have an
A
appreciation
Malthusian correction.
for science. I think people are like, yeah, science is good, but now you're just being evangelical like everyone else. Well, I'd say it's pretty underrepresented when half of the country is voting against science.
Yeah.
How many people don't believe in global warming? Is it caring about your neighbor and loving one another and being compassionate if you just want to deny and make up conspiracy theories of things like this? And so I was just I was on a little bit of a tear all last night thinking about, like, maybe this is finally the chance when people will stop talking about how we all need to, like, not sin and understand God better and how we just need to manifest things. Maybe this is the opportunity to be like, hey, guess what? Science has a few practical applications that you might be interested in. One, not dying.
Yeah. Does it help you deal with your own anxiety?
Well, I'm normally not the most anxious person in the world. I just had every single day this week, I have been canceling shows after shows.
I feel you.
After shows. And
I looked at your schedule before this, and you had a lot of shows coming up.
And it was a light month for me. This is, as far as I'm concerned. Light? Yeah, as far as, normally I'm in 4 cities a week. I was taking the month of March almost completely off to focus on, like, tax season and do business things. And so, it's one of those things I feel bad complaining because so many people out there are suffering and have a million other things going on. But yeah, I'm fucking stressed. I have part of the problem is I don't mind taking some time off. I have a million projects I can work on. But now I have a full-time assistant. I have a PR person, as you know. You got
to pay everybody.
I have a social media ads person. I have a podcast editor. I have a huge team of people that make this happen. And by the way, this is mostly a passion project for me. At the end of the day, these 3-4 cities a week that I'm touring in, I'm scraping by. Everything that I make, really? I reinvest back into my business. I hire more people. I try to expand. I try to make it bigger because I really believe in what I'm doing, and I am bad at saving for rainy days like this. So yeah, I'm stressing the fuck out. But it's interesting. It's gonna be a really great learning moment for everyone. It certainly is for me. Before I go hiring another person onto the team next time, I'm going to make sure that I have enough set aside for.
Yeah, we're all have to tighten our belts.
For being in a bunker for a while.
This is a crazy experience because it's sort of like the way the world has become more globalized with information, even just like the fiber optic cables going all around the world, and we're all tapped in with just like memes and ideas. And then something like a virus happens, and it sort of almost personifies that, where it's like it goes around the world almost as quickly. Mm-hmm. And it's like goes around the world because we go around the world now so much. It takes like one person on a plane, and then it just goes in this exponential curve. And
yeah. And the same thing could happen with the internet. The computers have viruses too. The internet could be shut down sometime, And then what happens? Do the satellites stop work? I don't know enough about any of that, but it's like a real wake up that things like this this can happen.
Yes,
and I still do. I still believe myself that the panic is a bigger deal than the virus itself. But the more
like a symptom of some other thing.
Yeah,
it's showing us something.
I think frankly, I'd rather. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to have the flu next week. But I'd rather, I'd rather get a flu for a few days than have the economy shut down. And if I don't want anyone to die, and I want everyone to be safe and healthy, but people's reaction to this is also unhealthy and kind of getting crazy as well. So I mean, I just I don't know. I frankly underestimated this thing. I thought people were blowing it out of proportion. I still do, but I underestimated just how big of a scale this was going to be, and yeah, it's interesting.
It's a wild feeling, man. It's a wild feeling because I think it's going to continue for a while because there's no other way around it, and
yeah.
I don't know. It's sort of like this collective. The only thing I felt that was similar, I was in New York City for 9/11, and that really like created this collective consciousness around things where everyone was talking about only one thing, thinking about one thing, and it really like stopped the buzz of everything. And this feels similar everywhere I go. It's like people talking about it. And this is unique too because it has to do with like other people being a potential threat to you.
Yeah, so
them
you
even
can no
it's
longer
a very strange situation
and hug one another and you know.
We're just being close. You're supposed to like be 6 feet away.
Yeah.
It's like, this is so odd.
This is I mean 9/11 unified a lot of people.
This is everyone's the enemy with this in a way, you know, and even if you don't want them to be.
Yeah, and it is crazy, and it's, you know, part of the issue is that the news has been and it's not I mean, it's what people want. People want to be scared. This is the safest time in human history. This is the lowest amount of crime, the lowest amount of murders, kidnapping, anything in all of human history. And no one would believe it when you can show people the data and they're like, I still don't believe it. Have you turned on the news? It's because we have confirmation bias. The news wants to show us the one scary thing that's happened. And so people have been panicking about every shark attack that happens. We better not swim in the ocean anymore because there was a shark attack and some terrorist attack. I mean, the terrorist shit's always been such a sham anyway. And then like every little school shooting, I've reacted the same way to those things. But all these like little anomalies that people have acted like has been the end of the world.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are more like, you know, like Sandy Hook or something. It's so horrific that you wouldn't have known about it in other eras of time. And now it's more like, yeah, you're going to know about the worst thing that happened on planet Earth every day. And some of them are quite heavy to handle psychologically to know like all these things. It's a tremendous weight. And I think something like coronavirus is just that. It's a tremendous weight on the psyche.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to walk through it. And it's changing our lives in ways we never probably imagined could be real.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's so like across the board. I mean, I did a podcast with a guy, Luke Howard, in Australia yesterday. Same thing. He's like, in the same timeline, like the past couple days, as everything ratcheted up. There's no toilet paper. You know, and everyone's bugging out.
Yeah.
It's global. It's global. I mean, just that on its own is like blows my mind about the fact that we're all kind of, a lot of people, billions of people are probably thinking about the similar thing at the same time. Maybe that doesn't mean anything. To me, it's at a minimum
it does.
interesting.
No, I wasn't trying to minimize any. I'm just, all I was saying.
Not at all.
All I was saying was that I think the news has cried wolf so many times over everything. And not the, but like the humanity has been like, this is horrifying. Like every little aspect of like, oh, this person tweeted what? They said what inappropriate thing? Like everything has just people's reaction has just been so outrageously disproportionate to like the little
the smallest
thing for so long that like
it's the kryptonite to the woke movement in a way.
I know, and now it's like, oh, shit's actually getting real. This is like what a real problem actually feels like. And you know, there's been plagues throughout human history that have wiped out a quarter of the population, you know, and this is nothing new, and we do. I mean, it wasn't that long ago people didn't even know what a germ was, you know.
True. 100 years ago when this happened, they didn't know why they were getting sick.
Yeah, I mean, 200 years ago, there wasn't even the slightest bit of like that something could be contagious, or, there's like a feeling of, stay away from the really sick person that seemed to evolve to be built into us a little bit. But people had no idea that like some invisible thing can like bounce off of you and then like go into another person, and then like they had no idea. And so, we're certainly more prepared just on the bare common sense of people like understand
washing hands.
But it's also, this might also be part of the product of an over sterile environment too. Like maybe we've weakened our immune system so much because we've been,
or global warming,
overly sterilizing every damn thing. So I don't know. It's tough to say. This is really interesting. I'm like apprehensive about saying anything about it because it's changing so quick. I was absolutely wrong about, I a few weeks ago, I did 2-3 weeks ago, something like that. I did like 3 shows, and it was like half the numbers that I would have normally anticipated. And I was like, maybe it's because I don't go through Arizona very often. Maybe it's because I tried a Sunday matinee show and got cocky, and that's not the best. And I was like, and then one day I was like, is it this virus? Is that what's keeping people in? And then a few days after that, everything getting canceled, and like South by Southwest,
very fast.
And now it's just like, holy shit. I mean, my psychedelic show, Head Talks, which is a psychedelic version of Stand Up Science. So I have Stand Up Science. I can look up a local university and get researchers anywhere. Because of the way the laws are, psychedelic research is hard to do. So there's not psychedelic researchers everywhere. So I can't just like email 30 people in a given city and hope for a guest. So I found the only way I was able to pull this off was I found a anthropologist in Peru with a book coming out that, we were on a speaking tour and a panel together and had like really good chemistry and are on the same page and have, and so I was able to get her to come along. That's the only way that this tour can happen. This woman, Sophia Rockland, who's just an incredibly impressive speaker. And so I have like my next run of this is all through May. Well, she's in Peru right now. We're working at, doing stuff with, ayahuasca at a temple, and she has a flight from Peru to New York at the end of April that just got canceled. It's 6 weeks away, and her flight got canceled.
Yep.
And
apparently this is all peaking out in the spring, so definitely a few months. There's no way around that, and it's just hard to say. Like, there's no way to know when we can do whatever we want to do next. It's impossible to say. You could take a guess, I guess.
No.
A lot of things have been pushing to late summer or fall. Even that's a guessing game, but that's, as I say, a safer bet than, a month or two from now.
Man, I have no fucking idea.
I don't know.
I was so wrong about this thing in the beginning that, I don't know. I think that this would be a good, my favorite thing here's probably my favorite thing about scientists is that scientists say, I don't know, more than any human I've ever met. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't believe how many times I've been in a podcast asking like the single greatest expert on like this very specific field a question about their very specific field, and they're like, I don't know. And whereas most people, I mean, you can go out in the middle. I mean, you can probably do this to me half the time because I can be a fucking arrogant asshole as well, as I'm sure I've come off a few times during this podcast. But you can go out on the street and ask your average person, like, what's the meaning of life, or how does global warming work, or tell me about the economy. Like, what? You have these incredibly complex questions. And most people will be like, yeah, pull up a chair. I'll give you all my half-baked ideas, and I'll deliver them like they're the fucking truth and the ultimate truth. And so, this is a time, I think in a time of uncertainty, we can start to learn uncertainty, and there's one of the big popular science books that I haven't read it. I've read another one of his books recently, but it was one I was getting to. There's a book called Anti-Fragile or something like that, and it's kind of predicting these black swan events and doing it by just like knowing that these truly unexpected things can happen, and how can you prepare for these like just completely unexpected, nothing like this has ever happened before until it does happen, and then how can you not only be withstand that, but how can you like become better from it? How can you make the most of that situation? And the biggest lesson in a book that I haven't read, but in terms of a lot of people trying to at the top of their game, understanding the complexities of the stock market and whatnot, is that they just approach it and go in each day and they're like, what don't I know today? And
well, that's a great approach.
And I think that's an important lesson that people could take away from this. I'm hopefully going to take away from this as well, because here I am going through life, and I've been through an injury that's knocked me out for a few months before. I should know better. But I've been going through life being like, okay, things are showing an improvement. Just keep dumping more passion, more money, more energy into this thing that's in this upward thing, and it's just only going to rise, and there's only going to be exponential growth, and this has been the most secure I've ever felt in my entire career, leading up into in the last year. I've been in the most control of my own destiny. I've had the most control of life I've ever had. And this is a lesson that like doesn't matter. You can be as prepared as you want. You can be at the top of your game. You can be as in control as you could possibly be. And holy shit, you never know when a virus is going to shut down the entire world.
Well, maybe that's a good way to close, because I feel like resting in this idea of I don't know is a powerful medicine in itself.
Absolutely.
Because we ultimately never really know, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so this is a wake-up call to say, like, it's okay not to know. And this whole thing feels like an exercise in uncertainty.
Yeah.
And again, we think we're certain often about why this is where my life is going. It's like this. And it's like, you know what? You actually don't know. And this is really slapping us in the face with that of like, now we really don't know.
Yeah. And believe me, I went on quite a DMT run, and I haven't smoked DMT since my break. I haven't had a breakthrough experience. So that was like 2017 now. So sneaking up on 3 years. But I've been thinking about dabbling back into it lately. And usually the more detached I am from a DMT experience, the more sciencey I can make my ideas about what it was, you know.
I love it. Okay.
So I'm probably going to be smoking DMT very soon, and so then you can have me back on for a big apology. I'll be like, okay, I saw
want a
it.
big
You were
part
right.
Two. Yeah, I'll put them right together. And I was like,
I saw it clear as day. It's absolutely God in different worlds and spirits, and no other explanation for it. Believe me, that's how I feel when I.
You don't know. You don't know.
You do not. I would never claim to know what the fuck DMT is. I love presenting new ideas that I don't hear a lot of other people having, and I don't think most people have my take on what the DMT is and or on what the DMT experience is. And I probably value that more than I should, just because it's mine and it's like novel and it's fairly ego driven. But yeah, at the end of the day, we do not know. That's for sure.
Well, I'd love to hear more about your take on DMT anytime, but it'd be great to talk again sometime. And it's just awesome to be able to meet you.
Yeah, man, I would love to. Yeah, if you want, if you want to sometime hear me blab about all of my DMT ideas and break down what I think it says about how the inner worlds of our mind are working, I would love to do that. Most people don't have the 8 hours free to get into that conversation, but hey, we're probably going to be hunkering down for a while, so we might have some time.
So yeah, well, I'll get through your publicist again and we'll make it happen.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Shane, for joining us on the podcast. That was an intense day when we talked, but I'm really, really happy he and I got connected. And I do hope to get him back. I want to hear his many hours of DMT theory. I really do. So I'm going to ask him to come back. This music that you're hearing in the background is actually a excerpt from the Music for Mushrooms live stream. So the second ceremony we did on March 28th, this is just a piece of that. I just grabbed a section and did a quick mix. Of course, you're hearing it right now probably in 128 kilobytes compressed MP3, so it's not really in its full glory of 24-bit goodness. But hey, who knows? Maybe some of this music will put together. One day I'll work on a Music for Mushrooms Volume 2. We'll see. I plan on doing more live streams. I'm going to take a couple weeks off before I go to Boulder. I don't have the physical, literal internet bandwidth to do that down there anyway. And but it's looking like on April 19th, God willing, there might be a Ram Dass inspired and focused live stream. More on that soon. And probably more with the East Forest Council offerings in the future. We're figuring this out as we go along and just seeing what's useful, what's needed, but also making sure to take time to pause. Thanks so much, guys, for the support. Thanks for giving the podcast a review. Keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. I'll see you next week. This is East Forest. But when you take that shit, do it with grace. Do it with grace.
Someday